Hello, everyone. Welcome to 1 Hour series on a special Sunday afternoon broadcast. Today we have a composer on our stream. Finally got a composer, so for those who requested a composer, make sure you put down your questions. And I was going to make this a surprise announcement, but I guess everybody already saw who the composer is. So I would love to introduce Paul Gordon. Here's Paul. Hi, Paul. Thank you so much
Hi,
for doing
Julia.
this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes, like I said, a lot of people requested a composer, so we have a lot of questions for you today. Probably won't get to all of them, but to start us off, could you maybe tell us a little bit more about how you got started as a composer, how what your journey was like, and how you got into musical theater?
Okay, well, let's see. Yeah, I had a love of music early on in my life, and I wanted to be a drummer. I wanted to be a rock drummer. And my parents, to trick me, promised that they would buy me a drum set if I took piano lessons. So I went, cool, I'll take piano lessons. I'm like 10 or 11 years old. And I was so bad that my piano teacher fired me and suggested that I play Little League instead. But my dad, not to be deterred, bought a guitar, took a couple of lessons, and then taught me a few chords on the guitar. And I was like fascinated. I'm like 11 years old going, cool. But he didn't teach me any songs. So I didn't know how to like play anybody else's songs. So I started making up my own. And I was convinced that I was going to be the first 11-year-old pop star, which sadly didn't happen. But it did start me on a journey of songwriting. And so I actually became sort of a professional songwriter for years. I was signed to a multitude of publishing companies, Universal and Geffen and MCA and Warner Chappell and a bunch of things. And, I wrote a couple of hit songs in my day, and I, you know, fancied myself as Elvis Costello and tried to get record deals. And I had a real deep love of pop music, but at the same time, I also had a deep love of musical theater because my dad also introduced me to South Pacific and West Side Story and My Fair Lady. So while I was growing up, I sort of had the Beatles and the Beach Boys in my ear, as well as Sondheim and Leonard Bernstein. So it was a pretty interesting musical mashup for me growing up. So, and then sort of in the 90s, I got bored with pop music. I got bored with writing songs about myself, really. And I'd always been interested in writing musicals. I'd written sort of a rock musical a few years earlier, but I decided that I was going to just sort of tackle my own project. And that's when I sort of transitioned into musical theater and started working on Jane Eyre.
Speaking of Jane Eyre, I absolutely love that musical. I'm sure
Okay.
most people are familiar, but if you're not, check it out on. Well, actually, before I tell people where to check it out, maybe Paul, could you tell us all where people can check out your work? Because
Yes.
like I said earlier, I had trouble finding some of your work, but you do have a few different websites.
Yeah, so I mean, you can obviously go to my website, paulgordonmusic.com, but you can also go to streamingmusicals.com. And a lot of my work is there. I've got 4 or 5 shows that you can actually watch the whole show. Jane Eyre, unfortunately, is not one of them right now, but we are actually working on the idea of creating a stream of Jane Eyre, a new version actually that John and I have been working on for several years. But the record is on Sony Music. And again, we're working on the show still. Isn't that amazing? After 20 years, we're still working on the show. That's what I love about musicals, is that they're never done. I mean, as long as the authors are alive, you can keep working on them. It's like sort of like clay in a sculpture. You can just keep finding ways of tweaking and improving. I love that. I love that Sondheim changes lyrics to company and keeps updating the work that he does to change with our times. So yeah, so we're still doing that with Jane Eyre.
Nice. So now you guys know where to check out Paul's work. Um, okay, so I want to address the questions we had specifically from actors first, and then we'll get into the composing questions.
Sure.
So as a composer, and I know it's probably different from for different composers, but for you personally, how much do you usually get involved in the casting process and the putting together of a musical? So once someone decides to do your work, from that point on, how much is your involvement, and what do you usually do?
That's a great question. So if it's a new work, I'm incredibly involved. There wouldn't be a project of mine that's being developed for the first time that I would not be fully engaged in casting and every other aspect of the show. When a show is licensed, like Daddy Longlegs and Jane Eyre and a few other of my shows, when there are productions, say, around the world, I'm not involved at all. Occasionally, a theater will reach out to me and ask me some questions, or an actor will reach out to me and say, hey, I see that they're doing Daddy Longlegs in this place. Can you put in a word? And if I know the artistic director, I might, but generally, I don't know the people that are doing my work in most places. But if it's a new piece, I'm engaged every step of the way, including casting.
All right. So it's for casting, and we actually had a music supervisor slash music director from Australia on one of these streams on Thursday, I believe, and he mentioned working with Andrew Lloyd Webber on I think Love Never Dies, and he said the same thing when it's like when it was Love Never Dies, so his new work, he was there every step of the way. But he also mentioned that the composer has, like, if you, I guess not hire a team, but you have a team, the casting team who casts, who you trust. But then at the end of it all, if you don't like their decision for some reason, can you go back and say, okay, I really don't like this person to play Emma
Absolutely.
or something?
Yeah. So let me clarify that, because how it will work is that the casting agent works for us. Like, we just did a Stella with Tara Rubin, who is like such a brilliant casting agent. And what Tara will do is she'll give us her suggestions, right? She'll give us the people that she wants us to see. And Tara's so lovely. She'll say to us, look, I think you should cast this person. But she does not make the decision. It's always up to us. But we respect her, or we respect the casting person we're working with. So we'll absolutely listen to them. And Tara actually, I was on the fence about someone with our last project, and her saying, Paul, I really think you should do this. And I just went, okay, I trust you. But if I didn't agree with her, which just wouldn't even be a conversation, I would just go, thanks, that's great, but no, it doesn't work for me. We're moving on.
All right, makes sense. Yeah, so it's, I think for those of us who are, auditioning all the time, it's interesting to know how much composers get involved too.
And everybody's different. Like, I'm someone who absolutely must love the voice of the person I'm casting.
Yeah.
So for instance, when I'm working with John Caird, who's arguably one of the great directors in the world, he will defer to me more on the singing, and I will defer to him more on the acting. Now, we're both engaged in both elements, and John is actually a fantastic musician. So it's not like I don't care what he has to say about the singer. I listen to him, but ultimately he trusts my ears for those decisions. And I trust his sensibility more when it comes to the actors, because that's his job. He's the director and I'm the composer. So the singing is more my job.
Mm-hmm. So to follow up on what you just said, when you compose musicals, do you maybe, like, in your head, or just have an idea of what you want that role to sound like? For example, oh, I need a lyrical tenor for this, or coloratura soprano for this, but it could potentially be a mezzo with the high notes or something.
Yeah, see, that's so interesting. I never think in those terms. A lot of composers do, though. I'm very different. For the one of my, I don't know if it's a problem, but one of my drawbacks is that when I'm composing, I generally compose in a male high bari, low tenor key, because that's where I sing. I compose for my own voice. People often say, Paul, you write brilliantly for women. And I'm like, really? Because I got to transpose everything. And then and then I've got to revoice, what I'm playing on the keyboard often, because it sounds so different. So no, I just think in terms of per show. I tend to gravitate towards since my background is pop music, since that's the world I came from, I tend to gravitate towards singers that are comfortable in both worlds, in a musical theater world and in a pop world, even on some of my classically based shows. Now, those aren't always the people we cast, but generally those are the voices that I look for.
All right. Well, that's interesting, because I don't know, personally for me, sometimes I imagine composers, they're like, oh, and this is going to be this, and then the soprano soars and the basses go here. But I guess it's,
and a lot of composers do. I just wrote a show called Juliet and Romeo with Curtis Moore, who's a wonderful composer. And when he writes songs, he writes in the key that the person is singing it, which I love hearing Curtis's vocals when he's the woman. It's glorious. One day I'll share those demos with you. But that's the only way he can do it. And it's so interesting. You know, everybody has a different way of doing it. And that's just the way I've always done it.
Nice. Well, thank you for that. This is also interesting. Okay, one more, I guess, not really an actor question, but for actors who want to get into composing, or anyone who wants to get into composing, say you have like melodies in your head, you want to put them down on paper, and then after you do that, how do you get your work out there? Like, how do you get started?
So that's a great question. So first of all, just to actors in general, whether it's composing or writing, I encourage all actors to be writers. Why? Because if you're an actor and a writer, then like as an actor, your whole dependency is somebody else hiring you, unless you are directing your own work. But if you're a writer, you can create your own work, and you can create your own work for yourself. So I just think, even if you don't feel like writing is in my bones, that's not what I do, just try it. Just do it anyway. Because the worst that happens, it will lead you somewhere else, and then maybe you'll find a collaborator that you'll write that piece with. But for composers, actors wanting to compose, there's so many tools now. I just taught a course at UC Davis, and one of the students came in and just had all, was using beats from this platform and chords from this platform, and sang a melody with their own lyrics over this, and it was a song. And that's the world we live in right now. There's samples, there are tracks you can sing to, or you can go the old-fashioned way of just creating it all yourself. But once you create it, in our social media world, it's just about sharing. It's just about sharing it with everybody you know and putting your work out there. It's the same way I do it. I know a million people, but when I'm putting my work out there with things that are not licensed yet or not out in a major platform, I just put it out myself and just share it with friends. And certainly if you're younger, you have the innovation to figure all this stuff out. Those of us of a later generation are like, what's TikTok? What do we do? It's like we don't know stuff. But really, the social media world, if you have a skill there, that's incredibly helpful. Technology is your friend in every way, whether it's sharing your work or creating tracks, creating music, writing scripts. Technology is your friend. But more than that, just not giving up and just putting your work out there is going to help you.
Great, thank you. Well, hopefully that advice helps aspiring composers.
Yes.
Now, this is a question I've had. I've actually asked my music theory teacher this. I took a composition class, which you have to take in the whole music theory and oral skills and all that stuff in music courses. And I feel like there are so many rules, especially for like choral, when it's more than one voice. It's like, yes, you can do this, but if it's a perfect fourth, you can't do this. But if it's a minor sixth, you have to go to like this. And if it's, a seventh goes to this, but only in these cases. And I'm like, how do you, I feel like, why can't you just write that something that sounds good, and then I guess you have to check it with the music theory? How do you do it?
So I love this question. So the reason that I love this question is because what I believe is that you should learn all the rules and then you break them.
And then you break it.
So I took music theory and I did all those classes in college, and I learned about parallel fifths, and I learned the
Mm-hmm.
whole thing. And then, but when I write music, I found that I didn't really think about it that much. I'm glad that I had the knowledge, but when I write to my ear. I don't think about what chord progression would my music theory teacher tell me should come after this chord. Like, that's not the way my brain works. My brain goes to what inspires me, what feels good, what sounds good, what does my ear recognize as something that I want to hear in this moment. Everybody writes differently, and music is a very particular thing that everybody feels and interprets differently. And everybody has a different, and all composers write differently. Irving Berlin, I guess, only wrote in one key and had a special piano built. And I was just watching a Sondheim interview last week, and I loved something. Adam Gettle was interviewing Sondheim, and I loved this one moment in their conversation when both Adam and Mr. Sondheim were saying, it's a good idea sometimes to move, if you write on the piano, to move away from the piano and just, and move away from an instrument and write in your head. And that's another particular skill that I don't know that I possess that skill. And that's a very deep skill, because when I write, I like to hear what I'm composing as I write it. And film composer John Williams, who's my personal hero, he can sit on a park bench and compose music and then write it down, as Beethoven could.
Yeah.
As musical theater orchestrator Larry Hochman, who did the orchestrations for Jane Eyre, among many other Tony Award-winning shows. Larry is also that way. Larry can have the television on with his kids watching TV, his wife listening to the radio, and he's sitting on the couch orchestrating. And that's just some people's brains are just wired differently. I so wish I could do that. And I can't. So I need to be either playing the guitar or at the keyboard and hearing what I'm doing as it goes along. Now, sometimes when I'm really in an inspired place, I can hear where the next section is going before I get there. And that's always inspiring. But as I say, everybody is different, and everybody's method will be different.
Yeah. Okay, that makes me feel better, because I also, when I wrote I only composed 3 things in that class, but when I wrote mine, I was like, okay, well, this sounds good. And then I had to go back and check to make sure the parallel fifth were in there,
Yeah, but you know what? You can write an entire song with parallel fifths and make it brilliant. There are no, ultimately there are no rules. There are rules that composers and musicians ascribe to, but in reality, there are no rules.
Yeah, it's when I look at sheet music like Sondheim, or I also sing Glitter and Begay a lot, and that song, or should I say aria, it's somewhere in between a song and an aria. It's got so many natural notes, or not natural, but the not in key notes. And I've always wondered, I'm like, how do you what part of your brain says, okay, let me take this out of the key and this is gonna sound great? And there's so many accidentals in that song that I'm like, how do you even come up with that?
Because the way you come up with it is by not being aware that you're doing it. The way you come up with it is because that's where the song wants to go. That's where the melody takes you as the composer. You don't think, oh, I need to stay in the same key. The only times I'm working things out like that is when I've traveled too far and I need to go back to the next verse, where now I'm in a totally unrelated key and it isn't as natural to get back there. That's when I have to do a lot of work, myself, trying to figure out, oh, how do I navigate back to that key? But, again, it's like, break all the rules, just write what feels good. And as I like to say, don't be afraid to suck, because that's how we learn. We learn by not being afraid to be bad, and maybe writing something that doesn't sound good, but how else do we get better? We have to grow. We have to have somewhere to begin in order to move to the next level.
Yeah. Well, I guess, and if it doesn't sound good, you just change it until you get it right, until you like it.
Because the bottom line is the judge is not the music theory teacher that's going to be looking over your paper unless you're in school. It's everybody's ears. And most people that are listening to your music have untrained ears. They only know what they like. They only know what sounds good to them. And that may not sound good to you. Hence, we can't please everybody.
True. Okay, I had a follow-up question that I totally forgot what it was, which happens to me a lot during these interviews because my brain is like, oh my God, what about this? What about this? What about this? I mean, for those of you watching, I'll make sure to ask all the questions. I see all your questions, and I know the ones we got in advance. I'll make sure we get to those. But first, let me ask another actor-related question.
Sure.
And I'm assuming this would be different for different composers as well. But how do you feel about people changing things in your sheet music? And by changing, I mean, if I want it, so with audition cuts, say it's 32 bars or 16 bars, and it does not end on a tonic, for example, and sounds like it needs to continue. So is it okay to change just the ending? Or also when people change something in the middle or change the lyrics or change, like how much change are you okay with or not at all? How do you feel about all that?
So let me just get some clarity. So your question, is it about singing a song for an audition or just what's the circumstance?
Yeah, specifically for an audition. Yeah.
I do not care at all. I would not care in the least if you changed any note or anything in my work for an audition, because A, I'm probably not in the room and would never know. And B, if I am in the room and you're just trying to show me what your voice does, I always, when I'm auditioning singers, what I often do, if I like them, but I feel like maybe that wasn't the right song, I'll just say, go back to your book and just sing something that you think just showcases your voice in the best way. Because if I love a singer, I will change something in my score. I might change a melody that went a little too high, unless as long as it wasn't my favorite moment in the song, to accommodate a singer's voice if I love their voice. And often when I'm writing, I'll go back, especially when I'm writing for a woman. I will forget, oh, not everybody can hit that note the way I can in a male key. And it just doesn't have the same kind of sound or impact that I wanted. So I will often change it. But for auditions, I don't care at all, but that may not be true for other composers. I just wouldn't care.
Yeah, I guess it really depends. Also depends on music directors. I've heard some music directors say they're okay with hearing the song not as written.
I mean, usually when somebody's singing a song in an audition, they're talking to the pianist. They come in with their own book. So I might not even be aware, like somebody was doing an Adam Gettle song and they changed some notes. Well, with Adam Gettle, I might be aware. But if it was another song, that I didn't know that well, I probably wouldn't even know.
Yeah,
unless it was my song, and then I would know.
Yeah, unless it's your song. But usually, I guess they say don't sing the songs from the show you're auditioning for anyway, so most people probably won't do it.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about that. I never mind people. I like it when people sing my songs, but I will say to you, if you're auditioning for my show and you're singing me one of my songs, yeah, it might be harder because I might have a stronger feeling about how it should be sung. So maybe that's better. I've never really thought about it before. I always like hearing somebody's interpretation of my song. But now that I think about it, it's probably harder.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you mostly, if you are at the auditions, do you mostly, you mentioned that for you have to love the singer's voice to cast them in the role. So do you at all look at the acting as well? Because a lot of people say, 100%. Oh, singing's not as important as acting, as long as you like.
So here's what I say, and this is, I love to talk about this. Mm-hmm. Musical theater actors have the hardest job in the world. In my opinion, there is no acting job harder than musical theater, because it's so rare in the world where you find a great singer and a great actor. Those two things don't always go together. Hence, trying to put a lot of pop artists in musicals and how that doesn't work, because, oh my God, they're an incredible singer. Oh, but they don't act. Like, why would you think the two go together? They don't. They're very different skills. And some people, hello Sutton Foster, hello Brian Darcy James, that we can talk, have both skills so entrenched, like they are so comfortable. And we can all name our favorite actors and singers in musical theater. The Broadway community, the reason that Broadway actors do this is because they are the best in the world at it. when we are now in this age of trying to put TV and film actors in musicals, whether it's on the screen or on the stage. And, those of us that know go, well, no, like the people on Broadway have trained years to be able to do this. They've dedicated their lives to it. They know how to do it. You can't just be a TV or a film actor and go, oh, I'm going to be in a Broadway musical now. That looks like fun. It just doesn't work that way. Although there are TV and film actors that have backgrounds in musical theater and have been able to make those transitions because that's the world they grew up in. But if you did not grow up in that world and you did not dedicate your life to studying and being on stage and developing those skills, you can't just waltz into it and do it. So I'm sorry, it was a long way around your question, but yes, acting is 1,000% as important as singing. And that's what makes this job so difficult. And yes, in the end, there are times where we're weighing decisions based on, oh my God, I love her voice. Her acting is not quite as good as actor B, but they're, and it's just, we go back and forth. It's like, I think their depiction of the character will give you everything you need, even though they couldn't quite hit that note as good as, you weigh all of those things. But for me, it isn't, oh, I love their voice, I don't care about their acting at all. They're totally equal. And that's what makes this job so challenging.
All right, so we all gotta work on both singing and acting.
You have to work on both. You have to be skilled at both. It just doesn't work any other way.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Well, I want to go back to something we discussed before, the voices and you writing things in different keys. So I guess this is a classical opera example, but also probably a rumor. I don't know if it's true or not, but I heard that they changed Carmen because it's written, Bizet's Carmen it's written for a mezzo, but they changed it for a soprano singer, like for a specific singer that they really wanted apparently to play the role. So is that something that you would be okay with doing? For example, you audition a singer and they're a baritone, but the role's written for a tenor, and you were like, okay, this is definitely, I want a tenor sound there, but then you like the singer's voice so much that you're like, okay, I want this singer. Would you ever change the key? For example, if it's Jane Eyre and it's some role from there and people already know the musical, would you ever consider changing it for an actor?
Well, we actually did in Jane Eyre. We originally, when we did Jane Eyre in Toronto, the part of Rochester was written for a tenor, a high tenor. But when we came to Broadway, the part was more of a high baritone. Because the actor, James Barber, had a different register than Anthony Crivello, who was a higher tenor. So we had to change keys, which meant some of the duets had to change. But yes, that's something you do at a certain stage. Now, once the show is set and it's licensed, I don't think that happens quite as much, or sometimes people would ask us permission to change a key, perhaps. But here's what you wouldn't do. What I wouldn't do, I wouldn't make a character that was an alto, a soprano, let's say, unless the character called for it. It's just, there are certain decisions made because you want a specific sound. And John Carrot is very keen on that, although me less so. I really just want the singer to sing where they are most comfortable. Once the show is licensed, those decisions are out of my hands. But while I'm creating the show, once we've cast the show, I'll change a key, a half step, a whole step, just to accommodate their voice. Absolutely.
All right, great. Because I was kind of not on the fence, but I wasn't sure if this actually happened in musical theater. I thought in like the classical world, the opera was a big no-no, and then I heard about Carmen,
opera,
and I was like
it. I don't really know opera, but it sounds like, ooh, you wouldn't really do that. But in musical theater, you would. But some shows you wouldn't. I mean, some shows you just wouldn't. But I know in certain versions of West Side Story, they've changed. They've changed it a bit. And I'm sure a lot of people watching will know other shows where they've made those changes.
Yeah. And it's, yeah, I think I've seen, I don't know if they're going to do that for Frozen on Broadway because, well, I haven't seen the show yet because Broadway closed before I get to see it. But I think the part of Anna or Anna, I think might be lower than the what is in the Frozen
Yeah, but
film.
there would be no reason for them to cast an actor that's the lead in a Broadway show and not make the money notes entirely in her voice.
Yeah.
Like, if in the movie version, the money, I don't know what the money note is. It was a D or a D sharp. Like, but the singer's money note is an E or a D. Like, that's what you're gonna do. There's just no question for Broadway.
Yeah, exactly. What better show off the good parts? Why show off? Be
Yeah.
like, oh, here's
No,
the singer singing this note that they can't sing.
let's make sure the audience only hears it in the original key because they'll know. It's like the truth is 99% of them won't know. My wife, Stephanie, will know. She would hate me that I'm telling you this story, but my wife has perfect pitch, but she didn't know it. So when we were dating, we saw, I took her to a Rubicon production of Daddy Longlegs that we were doing at the time. And she had heard the demos of the show. And exactly what you're saying, we had changed the key to Like Other Girls to match where Megan needed to sing it that was different than the original demo. And my wife, after the show, my then person I was dating, said, I have a question. When she sang Like Other Girls, she sang it here and then she sang a little of the verse, but the demo, she sang it here and then sang a little bit of the verse. And I went, how did you do that? And she went, how did I do what? Like, she had no idea, like not everybody could do that.
Yeah.
So she was aware that the song that she was listening to was in a different key than the original, but like almost nobody else would ever know that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really matter. Yeah, and it certainly doesn't hurt the song.
Yeah, even if they know, there usually people are just like, oh yeah, this person sang it in a different key, whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
It's like nobody cares. Yeah. All right, so now I would like to move on to asking a lot of questions about you.
Okay.
Just to get, yes, because this is a composer stream after all. So, well, first, I personally am interested in finding out, do you have your personal favorite of your own works? Like, do you have a favorite musical of yours?
Favorite show? God, I mean, usually the answer to that is the show that I'm currently working on, because I tend to, like, my favorite songs in Daddy Longlegs are the most recent songs, like My Manhattan and Graduation Day, because those are the songs I'm the least sick of, having not heard them a billion times. So my favorites really depend on, am I sick of this work or not? But my rule for writing, which is why this question is interesting, is that I believe that everything that you currently work on, you have to believe is the best thing you've ever done. Like, you can't fall back into, complacency. It's just, you have to keep thinking that this is your best work. So the piece that I'm working on now is called Stellar Atmospheres. And it's about the life and times of Celia Payne, who was the woman who discovered what the stars were made of when she was 25 years old in 1925. And she's the most famous astrophysicist you've never heard of. So as I'm working on this piece, that's my favorite piece. But the last piece I worked on was my favorite piece. So yeah, it's a hard question to really answer. So I don't know.
Yeah, I guess whatever's current, because you're so excited about working on it and making it better and better, that it's like, okay, this is my baby.
And also, I'm the kind of person that, like, sometimes when I go back and experience my own work, sometimes I'll go, oh, I'm really proud of myself, or, oh, what was I thinking? So I never know what reaction I'm going to have. Depends on the day.
Oh, speaking of reactions.
Yes.
How do you, let's say if there's always people who don't like what you do, doesn't matter who you are, what if you get like bad reviews, or let's say the director of the show disagrees with you on something, or the music director disagrees? Has that ever happened, and how do you usually deal with that?
Okay, so those are two very different things. I'm going to answer both questions.
Okay.
One is, how do you handle critics and reviewers, which is very different than how do you have creative disagreements with your creative partners. So the first thing is with creative partners, you work it out and you listen to everyone. And the hierarchy usually works as the director makes the final decision. Sometimes the producer will. But when I work with John Caird, the director makes the final decision, but John and I usually make those decisions together and we have a good partnership. But any healthy creative team, you listen to everybody and you work it out reasonably. Now, when you're dealing with the critics, it's a whole different thing. And you know, I was naive when I first got into this business, and our first first class production of Jane Eyre was in Toronto. And we opened at the same time as Ragtime in Toronto. And so my experience of being reviewed by the world press was interesting the first time. There were two major newspapers in Toronto. There was the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail. And the Globe and Mail came right to my door, the hotel where I was staying. And the Toronto Star came out a few hours later. The Globe and Mail was the worst review of any show I'd ever received or read in my life. It was literally the worst review I'd ever read. A few hours later, the Toronto Star came out and it was a rave. Now, since I was inexperienced, the first review I read was so horrible that it just shattered me. I'll be perfectly honest. I was not prepared for it. The opening night was sensational. The audience went crazy. We didn't know anybody. We were in Toronto. It was a completely real crowd. They were laughing and crying at the end of the show. So I thought, oh my God, the reviewers are going to love it. This person hated it and never mentioned the audience's response. So by the time the good review came out, it was all over. And I had to learn to grow a thicker skin, which I have over the years. And then when I learned moving forward, and I was told this by Stephen Schwartz, who is very kind to me. And he said, Paul, I love the show, Jane Eyre on Broadway, but the critics are not going to understand it because of how you've done some of the music. So be prepared. And what Stephen suggested that I do moving forward, he said, either don't read reviews at all or read all of them together so that you get the whole picture, so that then like you can see, like, is there a consensus? Are certain reviewers all saying the same thing, or are they saying different things? So what I've learned is there's always going to be outliers that are just going to like hate it or love it, and you should never listen to them. There might be a critical consensus that you should listen to. Go, oh, everybody's sort of saying this piece, this point. But what I do now is if a show goes to Broadway or is released as a stream, I don't care about the reviews because it's already done and I already know how I feel about it. When I'm developing a show, I read all the reviews together, as Stephen suggested, so I learn what needs to be improved. But I'll tell you, it never stops hurting. When somebody says something bad about you, it hurts. And when somebody says something great about you, it feels really good. But it's all false because the people writing, it's just one opinion. And I think music theater reviews are the hardest because generally the person writing the review may know a lot about drama and movies and what they like and how that works, but chances are they know very little about music and they judge your music anyway. And so that's life. So you have to really be careful, grow a thick skin and get used to it, but it's hard and I still struggle with it.
Yeah, I don't know. I've always wondered about the critics, and it's like, why do they even exist? Like, who cares?
Yeah,
I feel like the audience should be, the audience reviews is what matters. Like, the audience goes to a show, says, I love the show, and other people look at what the audience says. Why is some random person who's a critic is
exactly. I've always wanted to start a platform called Critical Review, where artists review critics. They review their criticisms in a real way. Yeah. And I think that would be really helpful. Because unfortunately now, especially with Broadway and theater, a bad review will hurt you and a good review won't help you. That used to not be true. It used to be a bad review would hurt you and a good review would help you. But now it's just doesn't mean anything. Mm-hmm. You could get a rave from the New York Times and your show could still close a month later. So, and I always felt the purpose of criticisms and reviewers should be to guide the audience, but it's not. It's just self-fulfillment. It's just, here's my opinion. I'm an elitist because I see this stuff every day, and they do. So they're going to have a much different perspective than the person that goes to see one or two shows a year. And those are the people I think you need to address, but that's not the way it is. And it will
Yeah.
never change.
I totally agree. But it's also, yeah, as even as actors too, if you get a bad review, or even like some friend of yours says, oh, that I don't know if I like that like acting that you did in that scene, then you're like think about it all the time and can't get it out of your head. And it's
Oh
just one
man,
person's opinion.
I had a critic that said about the music of Daddy Longlegs, it's something like, um, this music is so bad. He makes, or I don't even think he said it was this music. Gordon makes Andrew Lloyd Webber sound like Bach, and I know it was intended as an insult, but it was like, I don't even know what that means. It was like at least write something comprehensive so I understand. Like, if you're insulting me, just insult me. Don't, like, I don't know. It's just so
Yeah.
crazy. And then of course that same critic went on to review another one of my shows and gave it a rave. Like, loved the music. And of course I was not hesitant to use his words to, promote my show. Why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, it's a hard game.
Yeah, maybe he was in a bad mood that one day or something, because he tried to offend you and Andrew Lloyd Webber at the same time.
He didn't like it. It's okay. But the fact that his word gets to be the only thing, tens of thousands of people will listen to or know about it, that's what's really uncomfortable. Is that, like, one person will say something, and we're all guilty of this. Like, there'll be a movie or something that we'll want to see or hear, and then we'll hear one person say, oh, that sucked. And in our mind, whether we agree with that person on anything else or not, we'll go, oh, that movie probably sucked.
Yeah, exactly. Because you listen to other people like that.
Yeah.
That's why it's good to look at the review distribution. Like, how many people gave 5 stars, how many people gave 1 star. If it's all 1 stars, then it's probably bad.
Well, that's what I love about Rotten Tomatoes and that system.
Mm-hmm.
It's that, it's not taking one person's review, it's taking the consensus. Exactly. The truth is, when Jane Eyre, and this goes back to critics, when Jane Eyre opened on Broadway, there was something like Rotten Tomatoes at the time, and Jane Eyre had like a 90 or a 95 percentage, because most of our reviews were wonderful, except for the New York Times, which hated the show. And that's all that mattered. And that destroyed us, because one person didn't like the show, and it was the review that mattered in New York. It didn't matter that all the other New York papers loved us. It just didn't matter. And it was just that one publication, the New York Times, in 2000, that hurt whatever chance we had of crawling over that line and staying open a little longer.
But doesn't it get, it only matters if the show makes money, aka sells tickets. So do people only read New York Times and just assume?
Well, look, had we gotten a rave in the New York Times, I'm not saying that it would have completely changed the destiny of the show, but we probably would have stayed open a lot longer. We probably would have toured, probably would have had a lot of things happen differently, but we didn't get that review. Ben Brantley actually got the flu. He liked our show in Toronto, got the flu, couldn't go to our opening. A second stringer went in there, hated the show. That's life. That's just what happens.
Yeah. I don't know. I just feel it's so unfair. One person can ruin the whole.
Yeah. I mean, the New York critics had so much power for so long. And I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think having one person having a lot of power. Now, also, listen, shows also defied critics. Wicked got terrible reviews. It didn't matter. It was such a blockbuster. People loved the show so much. People were never going to stop going to that. And that gives us hope that a critic can't shut down a show anymore. I don't think, for sure, not anymore. For sure, the New York Times does not have that same power, especially not with social media and so many sources of information now. But that wasn't true, 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I feel like now people go, and if a person saw a show and they're their friend, they would ask the friend what they thought and go by that and not just read a critic's review.
Yeah, and there's also so many sites now, there's so many, there's a Broadway world, and there's all this stuff, there's all that chat, there's everything. You know, and there's your friends having seen the show, and I mean, everything's different now, but it's
Well,
still hard, and Broadway is still extremely complicated.
now everything we've discussed today, having considered all the challenges, and maybe some additional challenges, like what are, when you compose musicals, what are some of the challenges that you think are the biggest challenges that you get?
Well, there's two challenges. I mean, there's obviously the challenge of creating a show, and then there's the challenge of how to get your show out into the world. You know, I think I've written a lot of shows and I'm pretty prolific. So my challenge isn't how do I write and create a show? My challenge is how do I get my shows out to the world? And even having been someone who's been on Broadway, you know, it's still very difficult to create a new work and then have it realized. So that's why, you know, when Daddy Longlegs was live streamed back in 2015 off Broadway, you know, and I was at the show that night, and, you know, there were two dudes from Livestream, you know, with cameras who had never seen the show before, just stood in the back, filmed the show. I came home, me and Steph were on the couch. We went, let's just watch a little of the LA feed just to see if we're not embarrassed by this. I started watching Daddy Longlegs, a show that I'd seen a billion times, that I was so sick of seeing, obviously, because I'd have to see it so much. But like watching it online and just seeing it this new way, I watched the whole thing again from my couch. And I realized at that moment, like, no, not as good as being in the theater, definitely not. But here's the show. Here's the show. Here's Megan's performance. Here's all the music. I can see everything. Sounds pretty good, looks pretty good. I experienced the show. And to me, that was a light bulb. Like, this is how we do it. This is how we can literally transform our industry, transform regional theater, transform off-Broadway, transform Broadway. How do we get theater artists, specifically actors, musicians, and designers, to earn a living doing theater the way that film and television actors can, by receiving lifetime royalties for their work? And streaming is the way to do that. And I'm convinced of it. My partners, Tom Pollan and Stacia Fernandez, we have a company called Streaming Musical. Some of you guys may be aware of it, where we are dedicated to bringing new work to the public through streaming in a way where when you pay for a stream, instead of a subscription company, where you guys, we all love our Spotify's and Apple Music's and Netflix and what have you, we all do it. But the royalties to artists are extremely diluted in those platforms. So with streaming musicals, with pay-per-view, your $4 or $5 actually goes to the musicians, to the actors, to me, and to everybody. And it's actually a system that's much fairer, that can support our industry, instead of, you know, opening a show on Broadway, and if it doesn't outperform its competition in the first 6 weeks, you lose your $15 million and you're over. And that's just a crazy business model. And never mind the actors that like do a show for a year or two and then it's over for them. And the musicians in the pit that have played every night, they never get a dime ever again. Why is that? It's just wrong. So in terms of creating shows, I'm looking to stream my work as much as possible. Again, it does not take the place of live theater. And as some of you who've watched Pride and Prejudice know, we streamed my live version of Pride and Prejudice. You know, it took a lot of union negotiations. It took a lot of money for us to do that. It shouldn't have cost that much. It shouldn't have been that expensive. We should have just been able to do the production, paid a little bit of amount of money, streamed it, and then everybody gets paid forever. And that's just where we have to go. So I know that was a lot, but the simple answer is I try to create the shows, and the only way that I know how to put them out there, because even for me, it could be 2 to 3 to 5 years until a regional theater says, hey, yes, Paul Gordon, we're going to do your next show. Even though I have relationships with a lot of the artistic directors, my work's been on Broadway, they know who I am, they like my work, it still takes a long time. So I do think streaming it allows us for the creatives to take their own work back into their own hands. Because for me, if I can raise the money and rent a space, I can film my show, right? and I can share it with all you guys. And that's all I want to do.
Yeah, it's as great as unions are in some parts of our industry, they also restrict certain things. Like they don't let you do certain things, and it's so frustrating.
It is frustrating. And of course, I support unions as well as you do. We all do, and we support our artists' unions, but they have to do better.
Yeah.
And they have to find ways of speaking to each other, and they have to change. A lot of these contracts that have existed since the 40s and the 50s, they don't work in the 21st century, and they're trying. But as long as equity and AFM and they're not really speaking to each other in the way that they should. And again, I will just speak to the world as a composer. I've always been frustrated that I've never get to make CDs of my regional shows because of the cost prohibition. It's just not right. I can't tell you how close we came for you guys never having heard of Daddy Longlegs. We were planning to do a cast CD after our first production at the Rubicon, and I budgeted the CD for $10,000, which would have been really fair to pay 2 actors and 5 musicians for 2 days in the studio. And I was told that it would cost $75,000 because of this rule and that rule and this and this. 2-person show, 5 musicians, 2 days. So it was over. And then at the last second, a board member of the Rubicon came in and gave us the money, and the show was able to move forward. I did not have that same advantage to Emma, and Emma lingered in a drawer for 10 years until I raised the money to stream it on my own, to show it to the world. Then we got the record deal. Then we got the licensing deal. And then everybody was able to see the show. But again, as a composer, I was frustrated that I didn't have the money to make CDs and recordings of the music of my own shows. And I was stopped in my tracks. And I just feel like that's unfair. And that's the part of our business that needs to change.
Yeah, I feel like in general in life, if you're rich, it's just easier. If you're rich, just pay for it. Get your work out there. Money is everything.
And I have to disappoint people every day that write to me and say, why isn't there a CD of Pride and Prejudice? We can't afford it. They won't let us do it. They won't let us extract the music from the stream and make a CD for you guys and pay the musicians. I don't get it, but that's where we are.
Yeah, I can see how that's frustrating.
You can see how that's frustrating.
Yeah. Now, I just got this idea. What if someone who's super rich comes to you and says, I will pay for everything if you compose a musical, but I have to star in it? Like some guy comes in off of like, I don't know, like so some financial planner guy is like, okay, I'm super rich, I'll pay for it, but I don't want to be the star.
Oh, Julia, you asked me that question like it's never happened.
Oh, seriously?
Oh yeah. So I actually wrote and directed a movie that you've never heard of with Marissa Tomei, actually, called Dirk and Betty in 2000. And the producer would only give us the money if his girlfriend could be in the movie. And she was terrible, but he didn't have anything in the clause that said we couldn't cut her out of the movie. So we shot her, and then we cut her out of the movie. So yes, I mean, listen, I've had people like say, hey, could I be involved in some way? And I always welcome that. I mean, if it's I know we all want to be creative, but no, we're not going to take somebody's money for them to be the lead in the show if they're not worthy of being the lead. If you are worthy, yes, I'll take your money. But just in case anybody's listening, to your point, we will take your money because we're trying to raise a fund to stream 10 musicals a year, which we should be doing, 10 new works a year from all of our favorite composers, and bring them to you. And yes, like that's what we're trying to do right now, is find rich people who believe in the arts, who don't just want to see celebrities on Broadway, who actually are interested in new work that is being done by new writers and new composers. And also my peers, my friends and people that have been in this business a while. That's all we want to do. We just want to create and get our work out there. But the roadblock is money.
Yeah, and to your point, where people just want to see famous people, I feel like
Yeah.
I've run into this problem on these streams too. Eventually, it got to like the person has to have a Wikipedia page or else nobody watches. And I'm like, but there are so many artists who don't have a Wikipedia page but produce great work. Why don't you want to see great work? It's
Yeah.
just so bizarre. I don't know.
The most depressing words I've heard in the last 2 years in casting sessions were, how many Instagram followers do they have? Well, she only has this many and she has this many, so let's hire her. And that has happened. And that's what's happening. And it
Wow.
sucks. It's really bad.
I thought
And it
that was
just
only for
shouldn't,
film.
yeah, no, and it shouldn't exist. And obviously I'm a proponent of believing that our Broadway talent is the best in the world. They are the names that should be famous. They are the names that should be in every streaming musicals. And why I'm pissed, and I'll just say it, like why Netflix is putting celebrities in these musicals instead of the actors that worked their whole life to create
Yeah.
these characters to make them special. And then actors that we love, that I love, that you love, who don't necessarily do this as their thing. They're capable, like they're not horrible, they're not terrible, they're not even, they're good even, but they're not great. And we want to be exposed to the people that are great, that we know, that the people watching this know, because we love all those people. You know, I think Christy Altomare is like, you know, one of the new faces that I want to put her in all my shows because I love Christy and I want the world to know who she is. And I have other actors that I work with that I feel so strongly about that are not national celebrities, but you know, that haven't been in movies, but are so good at what they do that the world needs to know who they are.
Yeah, and I think it all goes back to money if you're rich, and
It does.
also like they did Les Mis the film. If they cast unknown actors, they probably thought, "Oh, what?" I just assumed you were referring to Les Mis because
What a disaster. Oh my God. I have to say that the trailer for Les Mis was one of the best things I've ever seen.
Mhm.
Like I saw the trailer for that movie and I was like, oh my God, they get it. This is going to be unbelievable. And I never was so disappointed in a movie musical as that. First of all, and John hates when I say this, John cared,
Yeah,
that it was the perfect opportunity to take out some of that recit for the movie and do some dialogue. You know, that was my 2 cents. But they just ruined that movie beyond belief. They put in celebrities that had no business being there. And you know, that's the world we live in. We're in a celebrity culture, we're in the Kardashian culture. Doesn't work for me, but here's where we are. That's why I'm just dedicating what I do to work with our great Broadway talent. I just have to say, you know, last year we were able to do a Stella Scrooge, A Christmas Carol with a twist in isolation, filming one actor at a time, and we used Broadway people. And Betsy Wolfe was our lead, who I'm sure you know,
yeah,
Julia. And you know, she's a Broadway veteran. Like the world doesn't necessarily know her, even though she's done film and TV.
mhm.
She's so good. She's so good. And and it's like I'm so happy. Like there she is. And maybe a whole new audience can discover her because she does what she does so well. And if you
Yeah,
put a film or TV actor in that role, it just would never be the same. And I'm proud of that.
yeah. Well, hopefully it can change. Although I don't know this. These days, it's all about, like you said, Instagram followers and like how much money you can, how many tickets can
I
you
know.
sell? You get the
I know.
role if you can sell tickets.
I'm trying. You know, we're all trying. We're
Yeah,
doing the best we can.
we should just all get rich and then we can do whatever we want.
Julia, I'm working on it. But I need you to get rich first so that you can finance my next 10 shows.
If I can be the lead.
You can be, well, I might make you audition, but I'm open. I'm open. But you'll have to earn it.
It's like imagine nothing worse than like doing the interview and then I'm like, okay, here's the money, I got rich,
Here's the
and then turns
money,
out I'm
but
terrible.
you
And you're
didn't
like,
get the
damn it.
part. Yeah.
And you're like, why?
Oh no.
It's
The tragedy of it all.
yeah, but I feel like it's probably a very like uncomfortable situation where you're like, oh my god, this person is
No,
terrible. How
I
do
mean,
I?
it's amazing. Believe me, it's happened and it's happened more than once.
honestly, it's so interesting that you say that. I did not think
Oh
anyone
yeah,
like,
welcome to reality.
wow. Yeah, I guess you get lucky if the person they say has to be the lead is actually talented. You're like, yes, to have the
But
money and
here's
the
the thing.
talented person.
But here's the thing, wherever the money comes from, even if it doesn't come from somebody who wants to act and wants to be in the show, it will come from somebody that wants some degree of control over a creative project. The chances are, you know, I mean, it doesn't mean if you're wealthy, you're not creative and brilliant. Of course
Yeah.
you can be. But chances are that the people that invest and produce, you know, might not have as good of an idea about how to do the show as John Caird, you know, who's a
Mm-hmm.
veteran of the RNC and of Broadway. And so those are the challenges there, that still whoever the producer is, whoever the money person is, they still have a lot of influence on the show, and not always for the better. But I've been fortunate to work with great producerial forces that have been completely supportive of me
Yeah.
and the people that I work with. And in fact, most of the people, most of the teams that I've worked with have been really understanding. And then you have great experiences in regional theater, like Theater Works in Palo Alto and Chicago Shakespeare, where their artistic directors and their staffs, it's just a love fest. And they just want to support your work and your art. And that's just, I can't even tell you just what a dream that is, and how
Mm-hmm.
lucky I am that I get to find myself working with those people. Because I have to say, outside of Broadway, there's a lot of great theater going on in the country and in the world. And I think streaming is bringing our
Mm-hmm.
communities together
Yeah.
and making the world smaller in a good way, and bringing more diversity and more opportunity everywhere, so that, you know, we can share our work and we can discover new artists and new shows. Yes, yes to the people that we know and love, and the shows that are the staples on Broadway that are the fan favorites. Absolutely. But there's room for new work too. There's room for everybody. And there's no reason to leave people out because I'd rather hire a celebrity. Let's just all get wiser and just welcome creativity
Yeah.
and support each other and just make our industry better. I think we can do that. And I hope streaming helps. And I hope people will check out streaming musicals and check out what we're doing there. And it's just sort of a new paradigm shift. And, you know, Broadway on Demand is doing great
Mm-hmm.
things. And of course, Broadway HD houses Daddy Longlegs. You know, we're all out there trying to do good work. So I just say, support us and support musicals, and let's see where we go from here.
Yes, and for those of you watching, after we end our stream, which we're pretty much out of time now, um, you will see an end screen with Paul's websites on there if you want to go check them out. Support, hashtag get rich and support. But anyway, it'll be all there. If you're interested in seeing more of these streams, you can follow this page or just check out the page once in a while. We do a few of these streams per week. We actually have a double stream day today at 5 p.m. today. We have Lawrence Loritz, who does happen to have a Wikipedia page, so you guys better watch for those who like famous people. We'll be talking about dance. And then on Tuesday, we have a producer on one of our streams. So we'll be talking all about producing and how to get money for stuff. So tune in. Now, Paul, do you have any closing remarks, since we are pretty much out of time? And I still have like a million questions for you, but since the
Well,
hour is
listen,
up.
we can do another one whenever you want, first of all, for more questions. But yeah, my final thoughts to everybody is just, if you love this business and you're passionate about acting or writing or whatever aspect of life you're doing, then my words to you are just perseverance. It's just, don't give up. You know, I think the people that are successful, there's so many disappointments in life, but just don't give up. And really, don't ever be afraid to suck. That don't ever let fear stop you from doing things. Like, show your work, even if it's bad, because you know what? You'll get better. So perseverance, don't be afraid to suck, and just keep going.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. And I'm just looking at some comments. Everybody who's commenting, I think I got everybody's questions, so I'll get to responding to comments later on. My other screen, for those of you who don't know, I have a million screens here. My other screen was not showing up the comments for some reason, so I'll make sure I got to all of them. And anything we didn't cover today, I'll make sure to leave for the next stream. And Paul would always love to have you back, since the
Happy to come back,
open.
Julia. We can do this again, because I know I tend to talk a little bit. So,
and I mean,
you
you're also the first composer we're having on these streams, so you get all the composing questions.
All right. Well, I'm happy to do it again, and it was lovely. It was lovely to talk to you.
Yes, it was great meeting you virtually. At some point, I'll be in New York and hopefully get to meet people in person. But for now,
absolutely.
I'm just hanging out in Florida. All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching, and thank you again, Paul. And
thanks,
hope
Julia.
You guys can join us for other streams too. All right. Have a great rest of the weekend.
Bye.